Chapter 2, as read by the author, me, Kathy Ashford. That's me. Alright, so, this is it. Chapter 2. I was up and about with the arrival of dawn. This was obscenely early, especially for me, but I had been awake at least half the night, too excited to sleep, and now I was keen to get on the road. My parents had insisted that Charlie stay with us at the manor instead of at the inn in town, and they had sent a servant to go and collect his belongings before we shared a meal together. By the time we had finished eating, Charlie had even managed to charm my father with his genuine interest in the running of the estate, and they talked at length about the operations of the local vintners. After washing briefly and dressing in some old travelling clothes, I went downstairs to scrounge some breakfast from the cook. My mother arrived in the kitchen just as I was finishing. "Gosh, you're up early. Couldn't sleep?" "Me neither." She shook her head and smiled at me. "How about you take some breakfast up to Charlie then?" She arranged a platter of sliced meats and cheeses with buttered toast and filled a mug of coffee for him. I carried them carefully up to the guest suite where he had stayed the night. "Oh, hey Jez, come on in," he called when I knocked. "Breakfast? Brilliant! I am starving." He poked his head round the side of the door leading to the bathroom, and I couldn't help but stare at his face. One of his eyes looked normal. The other... Charlie, is there something wrong with your eye?" He ducked back into the bathroom and I heard him laugh at his reflection. "This?" He indicated his eye with the pencil in his hand. His eyelashes were long, but so white as to be almost clear, and the rim of the eye was pink. "This is normal. I just haven't put my kohl on yet." "Your what?" "My kohl." He showed me the pencil. "It's a technique that we discovered after the leaving, borrowed from some of the human settlements in Yule, tweaked with Yavin, of course. We line our eyes like so," he demonstrated with the pencil, "and then we use mascarole on our lashes, and it helps with the glare. Light-sensitive eyes, you know." I had to admit I knew next to nothing about Neathi culture, except that they lived underground and smoked moss. And wore makeup, apparently. I left Charlie to his breakfast and went to pack. He had told us the night before that he had walked up from Fortesta, and my father had been outraged. "No mentor of my son should have to walk around the country like some commoner. You shall both have horses for the trip to Lille. Good ones, too." So out in the courtyard, Charlie and I loaded our bags onto the horses that had been saddled for us, and most of the household came to see us off. My father tried to hand Charlie a full purse of coins as payment for my tuition, but he waved it away. "The academy provides for the Bloodkin, our students, and all things essential to their studies. But maybe a small personal allowance for Jacinth would be appropriate?" My father shrugged and handed me the purse. "Don't spend it all at once," he told me gruffly, waggling his finger. "I won't," I told him, mounting my horse. The sun was just clearing the mountains and promising a long, hot day as we were ready to set off. My father shook my hand gravely and my mother waved, her eyes full of tears as the watchman opened the gate for us. At the bottom of the hill I turned back for a final look at the manor, perched grandly above the town. I could just see my parents still waiting outside, and I gave them one last wave as we walked down the main street of Jaleshead. When we had cleared the last of the dwellings and were out on the highway that ran between row upon row of grapevines, Charlie kicked his horse into a canter. He glanced back over his shoulder and grinned at me wildly. "Come on, Jez. Let's go to Lille!" On the third day of travelling, we reached a small wayside coach house just as dusk was falling. The stable boy, just a wee tacker, rushed over to grab our horse's reins as we dismounted a bit stiffly. "Hello, Charlie!" He grinned happily up at the Neathi. "So you got him then?" gesturing at me with a thumb. "I sure did, Sambeth." One huge hand ruffled the kid's hair. I went to follow Sambeth to the stables to groom the horses, but he waved me away. "Don't even think about it," he cried cheerfully. "Mer Rudy would tan my ass if he found his favourite Neathi in the stables." Then his eyes widened in horror. Excuse my language, Mer Charlie, sir. He bobbed his head in embarrassment. Charlie chuckled. You're excused, kiddo. Go deal with these horses while I introduce Japheth to your esteemed master. The coach house was a long, low building, constructed from the pale stone that was quarried back near Jaleshead, like the manor, but it was encrusted with wisteria vines. Long pods the only evidence of the purple and white flowers that would make this a rather attractive place in spring and early summer. The hubbub in the common room quieted as Charlie pushed through the door, pulling me behind him. It was still early in the season, but a large fire roared on a hearth to the left. Comfortable booths lined the walls, mostly full of travelling merchants, some much wealthier than others, judging by their attire. The local farmers and other folk were also distinguishable in their various states of inebriation, perched on stools at the bar that stretched from the entrance all the way round to the back of the inn. I nervously peered around. The merchants were mostly silent and staring at us. At the back of the room, on a small raised podium, sat a rather unpleasant-looking girl, her greasy dark hair falling around her face as she strummed a guitar and warbled unconvincingly. To her credit, she didn't falter as she glared at us for the interruption. Luckily, one of the locals noticed us in the doorway and called out, Oi! Charlie's back! More of them turned to look, and one of them cried happily, And he's got his kid! To which some cheering, to which followed some confusion. Cheering, much to my confusion. Suddenly, a huge beast of a man appeared from under the bar. Charlie, what the hell? Why didn't that damn boy tell me? He strode out from behind the bar to clasp Charlie by the arm. My Niathi brother, welcome back. Mer Rudy wasn't nearly as tall as Charlie, or even me, but was so wide across the shoulders, he seemed almost square. He had an explosive mop of salt and pepper hair cut unevenly across his shoulders, and his nose was reddened from years of landlordship. And here's our young lordling. Japheth of Jaleshead, I presume? We were still in the Jaleshead region, so I guess that made my father his lord too? I shuffled a bit, embarrassed, and held out my hand, but Rudy brushed it aside and hugged me by the shoulders. None of that, boyo. You're Niathi blood. You're different. He raised his voice. And any friend of Charlie's a friend of mine. Chuckling away, he led Charlie and me to some slightly threadbare couches by the fire. I met another one of you lot just the other day, would you believe? A Niathi blood, that is. With his mentor, of course. Thomas someone? Serious sort of chap. From out your way as well. Balgath? Talgarth? Something like that anyway. Good Jaleshead name. Bright orange hair. Only stopped for lunch, but they were on their way to Lille. I expect you'll meet them there. The musician had finished her song and was glowering at us as Rudy chatted away while settling us in, plumping cushions and rearranging side tables so they were well within reach. Come on, girl. Play something good for our visitors. Something we all know. He sighed dramatically as she shook her head and began to play again. Might as well be doing what I pay her for, Rudy muttered. He smiled apologetically at Charlie. She just turned 27, you see, and hasn't quite gotten over the fact she'll never be a queen. Charlie nodded sagely, still looking at the girl. Well, it is a difficult job. But for those who are not selected, there are a million other things I'm sure they would be suitable for. Like, music. Charlie turned to Rudy with a beatific smile on his face. The girl fumbled a chord but ploughed on grimly. I snorted at Charlie's apparent irony, but he looked at me severely. Perseverance is a wonderful trait in humans and should be encouraged. I hung my head, suitably admonished, but he went on more gently this time. But often humans seem not to realise what they are and what they are not. He glanced at the podium and shrugged his shoulders, smiling apologetically. Rudy had bustled away and now returned with a bottle of a local Pinot Noir, glasses and 2 plates full of steaming wedges of meat pie. There you go, boys. Fresh venison pie, with the last of the summer plums and a bottle of the best red Jaleshead has to offer. Would you believe he's only 10 years older than me? Whispered Charlie, reaching for his utensils when Rudy shuffled back to the bar. Man, I'm starved. And he tucked into his pie with enormous gusto, discouraging further discussion. I was a bit shocked. Rudy must have been almost 60 years old. I realised belatedly that I had never asked Charlie his age. It had become apparent in the few short days I had known him that he was still very young, mid-20s at the latest. And I knew that Niathi had a significantly longer lifespan than humans, but Charlie being 50? That'd make him older than my own father. Grimacing at how completely different the two men were, I reached for the wine bottle, and was shocked again. The best red Jails had to offer turned out to be from a vintage I had heard terrible reports about, and from the last year's vintage, no less. Charlie noticed me frowning at the bottle and laughed, his mouth full of pie. "Playing wine snob, are we, JJ?" He seemed to have a new nickname for me every day, and mostly it felt pretty cool that Charlie would bother, but this time it rankled. Seriously? This was the best they could do? I had to admit, I felt a bit insulted. As if reading my mind, Charlie swallowed his pie and took the bottle from me, pouring 2 large glasses. "Don't be insulted, kiddo. This probably is the best that I've got." He took a big gulp and one of his eyes twitched at the taste, but he managed to smile and go on. "Not everyone can afford to have their cellars stocked with the actual best." Ugh, I felt stupid again. Growing up in a fancy house with fancy food and fancy wine, I was just a silly lordling with no idea how real people lived. But Charlie just laughed when he saw my face. "It's okay. This is different to what you're used to, but don't feel bad about it." He took another swig. "Then it's not that bad, once you get over the initial, sting." Then he was actually right. Washing down mouthfuls of the bloody good pie, by the time it came to refill my glass, I was almost enjoying it. When we'd finished eating, a group of locals wandered over and greeted Charlie with such familiarity that I was beginning to wonder how often he stayed here. "That one night that you were here last, Charlie, me old boy," exclaimed a farmer, answering my unspoken question. "Oh, I was hung over something rotten the next day." The others laughed in agreement. My missus was awfully unkind. Charlie introduced the others as Tolaseth, Sergus, Marketh and Granth, who had been speaking, and he turned back to Granth. "You know, you should bring your dear lady wife here with you sometimes. It's not fair that we lads get to have all the fun." Granth snorted but nodded. "Well, yeah, I suppose that'd be nice. There's the kids at home and..." He trailed off as Charlie frowned at him. "Come on, that's easy. Get all the kids together and let the older ones take charge. Then they can spend the evening playing while you adults have a proper night out." He shrugged modestly. "Hey, you might even get some dancing going." He glanced at the podium where the girl with the guitar was struggling through a rather mournful ballad. "That is, of course, if you can get our proficient entertainer to play something more cheerful." The men cracked into laughter and the rather solemn mood was broken. The youngest of the men, Tolaseth, if I remembered, leaned in. "Charlie, I did that thing you said." "And?" Charlie smiled in anticipation. "Worked like a bloody charm." He turned and showed off a group of small round bruises on his neck. The men cheered and Charlie clapped happily. "See? I told you it would work. Women love the big romantic gestures, mad as it may seem to us poor menfolk." He sighed dramatically to much hilarity. "How do you know all this stuff?" asked the stout Marcus. Charlie grinned at his captive audience. "Well, of course, young Niathi studied human behaviour and psychology in depth, and that's before we're even allowed to leave the enclaves." Someone whistled, and a few others muttered, "Of course," as if they knew exactly what Charlie was talking about. He had attracted a bit of an audience at this point, and I suddenly felt like a total git sitting there beside him, realising I knew pretty much nothing about Charlie's early life, his education, though I had talked at length about my own tutors and how much I hated not being able to go to a real school. Even his parents. I listened more closely to his story. "So, we Niathi kids spent 30 years at school in the enclaves." The audience made noises of confusion. "You know, our cities, underground." There were nods of understanding. "Then, if we qualify, and most everyone does, we become journeymen. We live outside for 10 years, learning about life and thinking about what we want to do." There was some shaking of heads and nervous laughter, as the audience was slightly awed by the Niathi timeline. 10 years spent wandering around, just living. Unbelievable. Then we get to choose our profession and we go back to the enclaves to study. He coughed. Well, you can go back to study whenever you like, but 10 years is the minimum before they'll let you into most professions. So anyway, I decided I wanted to be a mentor, so I went back to VO, studied for 10 years, and now here I am, with my very first Bloodkin. He raised his glass. Just the jail's head. And he downed it to cheers and calls to Rudy for more wine. First? Hell, this night was full of surprises. I had no idea I was Charlie's first mentoring job. No wonder he seemed so young. I realized the crowd was looking at me expectantly, so I stood and held up my glass to Charlie, clearing my throat and feeling like a bloody superstar. Well, here's to Charlie. Thanks for letting me take your mentoring cherry. The room exploded with laughter and cheering, and Charlie stood to clink his glass against mine. He punched me gently in the arm. Cheers, Jad. Cheers, Jazz. You're a good kid, he hooted with mirth. Man, we are going to have the best time. Much later in the evening, when the crowd had dispersed to their rooms and their homes, Charlie and I had moved to one of the booths closest to the fire. That was now little more than glowing embers. Only a small party of drunken merchants remained, and Rudy was wiping down the bar with his usual energy. Charlie had delighted the crowd with stories from his years as a journeyman, and answered the barrage of questions about life in the enclaves, the royal court, and, inevitably, Hjaven, which the locals insisted on calling magic. Of course it's real, he answered, more genially than I thought the impudent question from one of the merchants who had pulled up a chair deserved. What, you thought we made it up? He had demurred, though, when asked for a demonstration. We are taught that we mustn't use magic for frivolous purposes. It's special, and we only use it when we really need to, he admonished the crowd, but then grinned to lighten the mood. And it takes rather a lot of concentration. With all this fine jails he had read, Rudy has been plying me with, I'm too far gone to even think about it. There had been much laughter at this, and Granth was dispensed to the bar to gather more bottles for the happy group. Charlie had even gone over to the girl on the podium and whispered something in her ear. Something that elicited a smile which lit her pinched face. As he strolled back to the couch, she straightened and tucked her lank hair behind her ears, and launched into a stomping tune that soon had almost the entire inn singing along. When I asked him what on earth he had said to her, he just grinned and shrugged his shoulders. I just told her how much we were enjoying her wonderful musicianship, and I suggested a couple of my favourites that I could just tell would sound great if she sang them. I had laughed at his ridiculous flattery. What? You just have to know how to appeal to humans. And if you tell someone enough that they are great, then they will be great. Look at her now. If he was being a bit heavy-handed with the life lessons, I figured it was his job. His new job, no less. And, to be fair, I couldn't argue with his logic. The girl was standing now, one foot resting on the crossbars of the stool, her guitar balanced on her upraised knee, belting out a tune that everyone except me seemed to know the words to. Gina, I love my Gina, I love my Gina, I love her, yeah, yeah, give me some. When she gives me that stuff, I just drink it all up. Yum, yum, yum. Love it when she gives me her wonderful love. Oh, I love my Gina. When she finished, she bowed at the hearty applause, grinning with pleasure. I saw one of the other young locals, Sergeth, I think, stand and fill a glass with wine, which he took and offered to her with a shy smile. Charlie noticed it too and turned to grin at me, both thumbs up. Well, that's my good deed for the evening, he chuckled conspiratorially and then sighed. Might make up for some of the disappointment in not being selected. By then the crowd, which included more of the travelling merchants by this stage, had noted the lull in the music, all once again clamouring for Charlie's attention. He told stories and joked and laughed until the wee hours of the morning when, overcome by exhaustion and wine, the crowd dispersed and we retired gratefully to bed. I awoke in unfamiliar surroundings to Charlie wrenching open curtains, flooding the room with indecently bright light. The bed, which had seemed so soft and inviting when we finally stumbled to our rooms the night before, now seemed hard as rocks. My neck and shoulders were painfully stiff. I felt like someone had carved open my stomach and rearranged my insides. I groaned, utterly miserable. But Charlie seemed as bright and cheerful as ever as he unlatched the window and pushed it open. I could have punched him. Got any sweet, neathy magic stuff to make me feel better? I think I'm a bit hungover. Hjarvin, Charlie corrected before laughing. Nope. Well, I do, but I've got something even better. He rummaged through his saddlebags, then gestured to the door out to the adjoining bathroom. Go get yourself cleaned up and I'll see what I can do. I didn't think anything, save hours of blessed unconsciousness, could make me feel better. I hauled myself out of bed and into my discarded clothes. Never drinking again, I muttered, fumbling with the bathroom door. Charlie laughed, obnoxiously loud. We'll see, kiddo. After relieving my roiling guts, I rinsed my face with the cold water in the wash basin and scrubbed out my mouth with the minty paste Charlie swore by. Feeling only slightly less nauseous, I went back into the bedroom to find Charlie seated by the window, a curious contraption in his hand. It was a wooden pipe of sorts. A long tube curved delicately away from the large bowl, filled with what looked like dried moss. A moss pipe, Charlie said proudly, holding it out to me. See, us Neathi only discovered the joys of drinking after the leaving. There's not much to ferment living underground. But this stuff, he gestured to a collection of small leather pouches of different colours that he had arranged on the end of the bed. Hell, we've been smoking this for 50,000 years. I sniffed at the moss in the pipe. It was sweet and grassy and smelt of clothes, or maybe cinnamon. Charlie giggled as I wrinkled my nose. Our horticulturalists take great pride in the quality of our moss. We've developed a number of different varieties from the original psychoactive wild moss we discovered when we went underground. He held up the white leather pouch. This is a very weak variety, developed to alleviate head and body pains, nausea, and to restore appetite, while still allowing for clear mental function. A perfect hangover cure. Sweet Lilbert, why had I known about this stuff? Could have saved me a lot of grief on the hideous mornings with my tutors after nights when boredom had induced me to filch a bottle or two from the manor's cellars. Charlie laughed as if reading my thoughts. I've noticed that humans tend to be a bit wary of Neathi customs, especially the further away from the capitals you get. He shrugged apology at the inference that I was a bit, well, rural. What are the others for? I asked, pointing to the other small bags. Oh, well, this one? He held the green bag. That's a new variety. Well, new in that it was developed after the leaving. This is for when you're drinking alcohol and you don't want to get drunk. Would have been helpful last night, I growled. Well, it was a Saturday night after all, and after 3 days of hard travelling, I thought we deserved to get a little drunk. A little? More laughter. He held up the blue pouch. This one's to aid sleeping. He pointed to the gold one. That one's to help you stay awake. The red is for when you want to party. It makes you laugh and laugh. I rubbed my eyes in exhaustion at the thought of Charlie laughing any more than he already did. He noticed this and giggled. And the purple is for, sexy times? He blushed, which looked odd on his grey face. And what's that one for? I pointed to the last pouch, which was black leather, embroidered with a delicate silver thread. Charlie hesitated. That one is the strongest one. Extremely psychoactive. It's used in certain educational rituals and only under close supervision. He laughed nervously at my interest. Don't even think about it, Jasseth. When you're ready, we will partake. It's part of the graduation from the academy. It helps you access your Hjarvin, but only when you're ready. If you smoke it in the wrong emotional state or without proper supervision, you can go insane. Or find yourself 3 days later wandering strange forests with your feet cut to ribbons. Or worse. His face clouded as if he remembered something painful, but he shook himself a little and went on. So, we'll stick to the white for the meantime, yeah? I looked around for a sparklight or some matches, keen to see if this anti-nausea moss would actually help. I really was on the verge of throwing up. Here, pop this end in your gob. And I complied as Charlie squinted slightly at the bowl end. There was a little pop of smoke from the moss, and I inhaled far too much in my surprise. The smoke was sweet, yes, and really more a vapour than a smoke, but the blast of hot fumes on the back of my throat made my eyes water, and then I was coughing furiously. Charlie thumped me on the back vigorously, chuckling away. Easy on, kiddo. Slow and steady wins the race. I thought you said magic shouldn't be used for frivolous purposes, I managed to splutter. Hjarvin. And there's nothing frivolous about curing hangovers, he cried fervently, sending me into a fit of giggles that quickly turned into unrestrained coughing. Taking the pipe from my hand, Charlie smoked delicate little puffs, drawing the smoke in and holding it before exhaling through his nose, the greyish-blue tendrils not much lighter than his skin. We learn early on that unnecessary use of Hjarvin in front of humans is a very bad idea. It arouses envy, jealousy in people, and that in turn makes them angry. We Neathi are still very much a minority here outside, and we have learned from our studies of human history that it is prudent for minorities not to arouse envy or anger. Humans can do terrible things when they're angry. He trailed off, looking thoughtful, then brightened. It is also prudent to make the use of Hjarvin seem much more difficult than it actually is, he grinned wolfishly. It makes humans less willing to covet the ability if it appears to be a bit of a struggle. I had to smile. Charlie sure knew how humans worked. So all that hand-waving and muttering when you put out my fire, that was just for my parents' benefit? Ha! You're catching on fast, boyo. I mean, words and gestures can help you focus your concentration, but for that sort of thing, totally unnecessary. He handed the pipe back to me and squinted at it again, so the moss relit. I realised I was starting to feel much better. In fact, as I sucked on the pipe gently, I was feeling infinitely better. My stomach is calmed, the streaming sunlight no longer burned my eyes, and, little which saved me, I was starting to feel hungry. I was beginning to fantasize about a huge breakfast when there was a loud knock at the door. "Who is it?" Charlie called politely, without the nervousness I suddenly felt. Smoking Neathi drugs in an inn-room is not something I usually do. "It's me, you big grey layabout," growled Rudy from outside. "And I bet you're smoking some of that effing Neathi white, judging by the state of you when you finally let me get some rest." To my surprise, Charlie laughed happily and called out, "Yes, indeed, Mer Rudy," as he went to unlock the door for our host. Rudy looked a bit of a fright as he waded through the room and sat heavily on the end of the bed. His eyes were slitted against the light, and his mop of hair was squashed flat on one side of his head, a fuzzy mess on the other. "Give me a hoon on that, eh?" Rudy reached for the pipe that Charlie had refilled upon his entry. He groped in his pockets until he pulled out a small metal sparklight, with which he lit the bowl and inhaled deeply without, to my envy, any coughing at all. Yep, that hits the spot. Thanks, Charlie." He passed the pipe to me along with, thankfully, his sparklight. "You boys near drained my cellars last night," Rudy exclaimed as I fumbled with the flint catch. "Here, let me." As he took it back and struck the flame expertly. "Don't they teach you little lord boys anything these days?" he grumbled. I tried to cough politely as this new blast of moss seemed even hotter than before, and the other two laughed at my discomfiture, Rudy whacking me on the back with a meaty fist. "Well, Rudy," said Charlie, accepting the pipe and the sparklight, "I'm sure at least one of those merchants here last night will have some interesting vintages in their cargo." "Huh, yeah, and they're all still asleep, lazy buggers." Charlie grinned. "And if they feel anything like how I did when I woke up, they won't be putting up much of a fight when it comes to bargaining." "Indeed they won't," Rudy grunted happily. He rose and made his way towards the door, gesturing for us to follow. "I'm bloody hungry now, and if I know anything, and I think I do, I bet you boys will be desperate for something to eat too. I managed to get some breakfast on before I came up. We got some leftover pie, toast and eggs, freshly laid too." My belly was rumbling loud enough for me to hear it. Rudy was right. I was desperate. and judging by the speed with which we tumbled out of the door and down the hallway, the others were too. The shutters were drawn and the windows open, letting light and fresh air flood the common room, which last night had been warm and cosy, but decidedly close. Nevertheless, the fire had been banked and was crackling a welcome as Rudy steered us into a booth. He disappeared behind the bar into the room that was presumably a kitchen, and came back laden with a jug of steaming coffee, mugs, and 3 plates piled high with food balancing precariously on his arms. The toast was smothered with butter and perfectly browned so as not to go soggy when I punctured the yolk of my poached eggs with my fork, the brightest yolk I had ever seen dribbling in golden rivulets. I helped myself to the bowl of salt, sprinkling my breakfast liberally. Bloody good stuff, that. Rudy gestured at the bowl with his fork, his mouth already full. All the way from Melion. It was possibly the best breakfast I had ever eaten. The pie was even better than it had been the night before. The eggs and toast were salty and delicious, and suddenly I was regarding my empty plate with dismay. Rudy laughed and filled a mug from the pitcher of coffee, already milked and sweetened. "Drink your coffee before it gets cold, eh, lad? And I'd fill you up with more, but I believe you've a long day's ride ahead of you. Don't want you falling off your horse 'cause you're so stuffed." When the other two had finished, Rudy called for Sambeth to ready our horses, as we went back to our rooms to repack our saddlebags. Some of the other merchants had surfaced by this stage, and they greeted us slowly, the misery of hangovers etched on their faces. I, on the other hand, was feeling positively bubbly, buoyed by the breakfast and 2 mugs of sweet coffee, as well as the marvellous white. We met Rudy and Sambeth by the stables, Rudy fussing over our horses and rechecking the girth straps. "We want our favourite guests to be safe on their travels, don't we, Sambeth?" he growled at the boy. "Unless, of course," he turned to Charlie beseechingly, "you would stay another night?" Charlie was gracious in his refusal. "Of course we would love to, Rudy. This is the best inn this side of the jail." Rudy scratched his head, pleased and a bit embarrassed by the praise. "But we're on a bit of a time frame, I'm afraid. We need to get Jesseth to Lille soon. His classes start in a week, you know." "Of course, Charlie, Lord Jesseth. All the best with your studies, young sir." Sambeth held our horses for us as we mounted. "Promise you'll come back soon, my Charlie. Promise?" the boy called after us as Rudy led us to the highway. "Of course, Sambeth. You behave for me, Rudy, now you hear?" "Of course," he cried with a cheeky grin. "I always do." "He's a good boy, that one," Charlie told Rudy. "Of course he is. But a bit bloody cheeky for my liking," he grumbled, and Charlie laughed. "I can only imagine how cheeky you were when you were a boy." Rudy slapped the rump of Charlie's horse in affirmation as he grinned ruefully at us. "You will come back, won't you? I imagine Lord Jesseth here will have to visit his venerable parents from time to time." "Of course he will, Rudy, and there's nowhere else would rather stay." And with that, Charlie urged his horse to a trot, and I followed, heading westward down the beaten dirt road. I turned to see Rudy still standing by the gate, waving his farewell. I waved back before the road curved, and a tall grove of poplar trees obscured him from view. I hoped we would be back soon. I had had such a nice time at the small wayside inn, drinking and singing and laughing with regular people, away from the confinement of my parents and the pressures of being the Lord's heir. It was, however, to be a very long time before I saw Sambeth and Rudy again. End of chapter 2. Dun 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 dun. Yeah.